Hello, I'm Mike Burek, the moderator for today's Made in Ukraine Tech Town Hall discussion. Today we'll be talking about a 2016 USAID study on the Ukrainian diaspora investment. And I'm pleased to say that we have a number of guests with us today. Natalia Berezhna is project manager with USAID. Mm-hmm. He has over 20 years of experience with technical assistance projects, 17 of which are with USAID. And she was the project manager for the study. Also speaking today will be Dr. Lisa Riddle, an associate professor of international business and international affairs at the George Washington University School of Business in Washington, D.C. Dr. Riddle spearheaded the assessment team for the 2016 study, and she's also an expert on diaspora investment and entrepreneurship, having studied it and talked about it for over 20 years. We also have Nick Bilogorski. Nick is a principal at 408 Ventures, which is an angel investor group based in California. He's also founding team member at Cyfort, a next-generation anti-malware startup and a cybersecurity expert. And then we have Yevhen Sisoyev, who is managing partner at A Ventures Capital. He's an investor and a tech entrepreneur. A Ventures invests at an early stage and looks to team up with entrepreneurs from Eastern Europe. I usually host and produce a monthly podcast series called Made in Ukraine Tech Startup Edition. And that podcast focuses on Ukrainian technology startups, particularly those that are looking to go global. So welcome today, everyone. Thank you for joining the discussion. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to turn over the discussion initially to Natalia Berezhna to talk a little bit about how the 2016 study came about, and what was the purpose of it, and what are the plans for the future with it. Natalia?
Yes. Доброго дня. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to those who listen to us, and thank you so much for the introduction, and to all of the delegates and participants, welcome. Mike, I'd really like to thank you for hosting this event, because indeed the diaspora survey that we did in 2015-2016 keeps bringing back to us the idea of how can we look into the incredible potential that the Ukrainian diaspora in the United States of America and in Canada can bring to the table to help Ukraine develop. Back in 2014, Ukraine was going through this revolution of dignity, and when we saw how the whole world was coming in support for Ukraine. Particularly, we saw a lot of potential and a lot of resources coming from the United States of America and Canada. Over the revolution of dignity, if you look at the total amount of funds transferred, there was close to 8.5 billion of US dollars sent abroad to Ukraine to help and support. The Army source, the Canadian NGO, they also raised funds for Ukraine to support the army and the troops. So when we were looking at what was happening in Ukraine and how the Ukrainian diaspora abroad was reflecting on that and how they were supporting it, we wanted to see what is that what you said you can do to help build on those emotional, financial, cultural ties, and how can we channel the resources that the diaspora was willing to give to Ukraine to help Ukraine develop. It was the time when diaspora opened their hearts, opened their homes to Ukrainians. And we city decided to look at the assessment, because everybody was talking that some mechanism is missing, and it could be an international organization that could potentially set up a fund or some sort of maybe a guarantee facility that can really pull all these funds together and guarantee the use of these funds to go to the process and productive use. So that's when we created the scope of work to look at the initial assessment, and we were very happy that Dr. Lisa was available to partner with us in this, and we wanted to see what was their potential appetite for investment, what was their particular area of interest, what was the mapping, and how can we look at different models, and what would be the size of the funds that we could help create. After that, we were thinking that with USAID and the other partners on the ground, we could look into the modeling, into the living analysis, for us to see is out there because we know that some 25 million of Ukrainians that left Ukraine in search of a better life over the last 300 years. And we just wanted to be sure that we are tapping into the area that can generate an outcome for both sides of the transaction. So, of work and our partner Sigura, partner with Dr. Riddle, and we have the study results available to us.
Okay, Natalia, thank you for that introduction. I did want to mention that we have two sponsors for today's session. The first is USAID, which is the lead U.S. government agency working to end extreme global poverty and enable resilient and democratic societies around the world. And also the U.S.-Ukraine Foundation, which has been working since 1991 to support democracy, a free market, and human rights in Ukraine, and also to help develop civil society there. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Lisa Riddle to talk about the 2016 USAID Ukrainian Diaspora Investment Study and to share with us some of the highlights of that study. Dr. Riddle?
Great. Well, thank you. It's such an honor and a pleasure to be here and share with you the results of this investment study. Let me give you the bottom line up front first. Now, our objective was to determine the role that the Ukrainian diaspora in the United States and Canada could play in Ukraine's business and investment environment. The study examines ways of attracting the diaspora as well as maximizing their business and investment activities in Ukraine, with a particular focus on diaspora investment fund models. So what did we find? The Ukrainian diaspora in the United States and Canada is a highly organized, multi-generational, and very proud diaspora with significant human, financial, and social capital. Diasporans currently engage with Ukraine via travel, remittances, charity, and volunteerism, but few are engaged in business investments. Many are impeded by experience with or stories that they've heard of corruption and previous diaspora failure. Investment interest in the diaspora is mainly driven by desires to see institutional change and to seek an emotional return on their investments. They're interested in investing in the ICT, agriculture, and education sector. Overall, the diaspora interest in the three different prototype diaspora investment fund concepts that we shared with them was positive, but it was moderate. There's an expected strong ramp up, particularly for first generation, that migrant group that has just come to new countries of residence in the United States and Canada, as well as among moderate to high net worth individuals. So in the brief time that we have here, I'm going to pull out some of these highlights and go a little bit deeper in them to give you more greater insight into the findings. To actually get all of this knowledge, we got information from lots of different aspects of the diaspora over a period of several months. We began first, of course, going to the many different diaspora organizations that exist in the Ukrainian diaspora, both in Canada and the United States. We identified over 400 different diaspora organizations. Through searches that we did online and through databases and through LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook and so on, we identified over 42,000 Ukrainian individuals. And of that, 666 known investors living in the United States or Canada. We conducted in-depth interviews with diaspora organization leaders and diaspora investors. We conducted focus groups in many different cities in the United States and Canada. And we conducted an online survey that was taken by over 1,200 individuals. Let me give you a picture of what we learned about the social landscape of the Ukrainian diaspora. This is a very significant diaspora for both the United States and Canada. Over 1.3 million Ukrainian diasporans living in Canada and around 960,000 in the United States. This graphic's shading demonstrates that there are certain provinces in Canada, certain states in the United States, where there are significant enclave numbers of Ukrainian diasporans living in these locations. In terms of who responded to that actual survey, that over 1,200 individuals, half of those individuals were born in Ukraine, half were born elsewhere. One of the most interesting things about the Ukrainian diaspora, of course, is that it is a highly mobilized diaspora with many different generations involved. And what we mean by generations is when we use the term first generation, we're talking about the migrant that crosses a border. Second generations then would be the migrant's children born in a country of residence. Third generation is the migrant's grandchild born in the country of residence, and so on. With this survey, we were actually able to identify and hear from Ukrainian diasporans with as many as 5 generations down. So someone whose great-great-grandparents actually were born in Ukraine. Now, those that responded to our survey from the United States, that was primarily a first-generation subsample. But we also had representation from second, third, and beyond generations. In Canada, it's just slightly different. We had a little bit more in terms of response rate from the second generation, but with first generation and subsequent generations also responding to the survey. Really very interesting aspect about this Ukrainian diaspora is just how incredibly educated this diaspora is, with the majority having a bachelor's degree or greater, and no real significant differences across generations in terms of educational attainment. But let's really turn to what we're interested in here, and what is the diaspora interested in investing in Ukraine? In terms of looking at investment interest by industry sector, ICT is the sector that the diaspora is really most interested in investing in. Respondents looked at each one of these sectors and gave us a read on how attractive they thought these sectors were, ranging from 1, not attractive at all, to 7, being extremely attractive for investment. So coming in at a 5.69, ICT is a fairly strong level of interest, followed by agriculture and education, energy, construction and infrastructure, and then also some interest in manufacturing and assembly, healthcare, sanitation and water, and the financial services sector. But particularly with diaspora investors, we often want to ask the question, not only what sector are you interested in investing in, but do you have a geographic preference for investment? We often wonder if diasporans are interested in investing in particular geographies where they're from, or at least where they currently still have social ties. So this table presents different oblasts within Ukraine in terms of the percent of our survey that found that oblast attractive for an investment, as well as the percent of the survey of individuals who still maintain social ties to that particular oblast. What we find here is interesting. Although there's some correlation between attractive oblasts and those oblasts where the diaspora does have social ties, there are several notable exceptions, as you can see here. Now, only 10% of the sample didn't find any oblast attractive at all for investment. And in a fairly significant finding, over a quarter of the survey respondents had no preference at all. They found all oblasts attractive for investment. Now, as I mentioned, part of our study, we were putting in front of our diasporans different prototype investment models to see to what extent they might be interested in investing a for-profit type of investment model versus a social impact investment model versus a more charity-oriented investment model. I'm going to take you through the definition of each one of these models and then share with you what our respondents told us in terms of their likelihood to invest in each one of these prototypes, how attractive they think each one of these prototypes are, And then if that actual investment fund were to be offered immediately, how much they would anticipate they would invest in the first year in that model. And then if that fund actually did what it's supposed to do, how much they would actually anticipate they would be investing in that fund 3 years from when it was created. So it gives us a little bit of a picture of how much people would be willing to open their wallet initially, and then kind of more the long-term investment flow into the fund. So let's look at our first model. This is the for-profit model prototype. In this model, the Ukrainian diaspora would be encouraged to invest in an interest-bearing note that would be offered by a company called HomeStrings to diaspora investors. Now, in this model, there would be also a 50% loan portfolio co-guaranteed by USAID with a bank partner in Ukraine that would make partially guaranteed loans to Ukrainian entrepreneurs and small and medium-sized enterprises. A bank would then allocate capital to entrepreneurs and small and medium-sized enterprises. And an interesting feature of this model, there would be a public-private partnership between USAID, donor agents, and iHub, a business incubator, to expand up to 6 incubators throughout Ukraine. The incubators would provide entrepreneurs and small and medium-sized enterprises with various different support services, such as low-cost office space, mentorship, etc. Now, for this particular for-profit model prototype, respondents were given a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is not attractive at all for investment and 10 was extremely attractive for investment. And the average score for interest for the for-profit prototype was 4.96. So again, moderate interest in investment, but fairly strong. How likely would they be to invest in this fund if it were made available in 2016? The average score for this model came out at 4.5. So again, moderate to strong. But what's interesting is that if this fund were created, the estimated amount that diasporans will be willing to invest in immediately was reported to be $500. But if the fund did what it was supposed to do by 2019, there would be a real lift in what people would be expecting on average to be contributing, around $3,000 on average to that fund. Now let's compare these findings in the for-profit prototype to the social impact model that we proposed. So in this model, the Ukrainian diaspora was encouraged to provide interest-free loans on a Kiva debt crowdfunding platform. Now, if the crowdfunding target was not made on the Kiva platform, we were proposing that the Western NIS Enterprise Fund would serve as a backstop if necessary. Now, in this model too, there was a 50% loan portfolio co-guarantee with a bank partner in Ukraine who would then make partially guaranteed loans to social enterprises. And again, a social enterprise is an organization that applies commercial strategies to maximize improvements in human and environmental well-being. This could include maximizing social impact rather than profits for external stakeholders. Then the Western NIS Enterprise Fund would provide grant support to build capacity of social enterprises in Ukraine. Now, in terms of the overall perceived attractiveness of this model comes in at 4.45, and the likeliness to invest at 4.07. If the fund was made immediately available, the average expected contribution to that fund was estimated to be around US $100. And 3 years from now, the fund did what it was supposed to do, the estimated investment would be $650. So let's compare that social impact model finding and the previous for-profit model prototype finding to a more charity model. Now, in this model, the Ukrainian diaspora would be encouraged to make a tax-deductible donation within a donor-advised fund structure. The donor-advised fund would allow donors to recommend grants from the fund over time, and the donor-advised fund would leverage a portal to facilitate grants to vetted, qualified, non-governmental organizations in Ukraine. This particular model received an average score of attractiveness of 4.94 and a likelihood to invest of 4.58. The immediate estimated investment average was around 250, but then the expectation was over time that would grow to 950. So what we found here really is that the Ukrainian diaspora social landscape is very positive and conducive for target marketing and customer relationship management activities. The database that we created through this study really does provide a launching pad for outreach and sales of activities. Coordinated activities with Canada, we argued, could be quite key given diaspora density in that country and the number of different diaspora organizations there. The Ukrainian diaspora is well endowed with human, financial, and transnational social ties that can be leveraged for diaspora investment and development. There are significant differences in terms of demographics, social structure, and some investment attitudes between the first and subsequent immigrant generations in this diaspora group. The first generation is relatively younger and not always well integrated into more traditional local diaspora organizations, networks, and activities. In many cases, they've created their own organizations that run in parallel. Outreach and marketing activities, we argued, should be sensitive to these issues. And we thought that USAID has a great opportunity here to convene across the generations in this diaspora communities and broker any possible existing social divides within the diaspora for greatest development impact. We also found that the majority of Ukrainian diaspora engagement with Ukraine occurs through tourism and remittances, charity, and volunteerism, that business investment models, we argued, should seek ways to capitalize on these existing forms of engagement. Some ideas that we discuss in the report: since leisure travel is most common, we think that leisure tourism, that sort of combination of leisure and business types of tourism, we also see that that's popular. So we suggest in the report that a potential study tour model, whereby prospective investors might be able to visit diaspora fund businesses as part of their tour experience, could be explored as a possible sales promotion vehicle. Money transfer organizations and other remittance providers and charitable organizations might be approached for possible co-marketing activities. And new opportunities for diaspora volunteer mentoring, in person or either via distance, could be created to assist with the incubation and development of investment target organizations to incentivize investment trial and further investor commitment. The Ukrainian diaspora investment interest is primarily motivated by expectations that their investments will promote institutional change and that they will receive an emotional return on that investment, that they will feel good that their investment is actually making a difference. Concerns about social status and financial motivations matter too in the investment decision-making process, but really to a lesser degree in this diaspora community. The diaspora is seeking a trustworthy and impactful investment model to serve as catalytic capital in Ukraine. Diaspora investment marketing, communications, and sales promotion activities, therefore, should really employ the language, imagery, and narratives that speak to these psychological drivers. And the investment product concepts and messaging should also highlight and emphasize accountability, transparency, clear governance, and fairness processes and features to overcome existing psychological investment barriers. Regular, clear, and accessible investment, double bottom line performance reporting would be critical, both in terms of financial impact as well as social impact. And such messaging should also draw on the language the diaspora utilizes itself that we identified in the study to describe their diaspora identity, such as proud, connected, responsible, hardworking, and home. So as we talked about today, the Ukrainian diaspora investment interest in all three of the tested prototype investment model concepts exists. The level of interest is quite similar across concepts. The interest is moderate. There are significant differences in median expected investment for trial in year 1 and repeat investment in year 3. This signals substantial wait-and-see capital exists. Investors are skeptical about the proposed models, but hope that they will generate what is promised. We think that this finding underscores the importance of investor communication and messaging during the launch and trial period. Wait-and-see capital is particularly noteworthy among first-generation diasporans and those reporting a net worth of over $100,000. While trial investment levels are expected to be the same for these two segments as compared to other investors in the sample, these segments expect to significantly increase their investments in year 3 if the fund proves itself to investors during the trial period. The lifetime potential value of these segments warrants specific investments in targeted sales promotion and/or marketing communications activities aimed at these groups. So overall, a very interested, I think, diaspora community in investment and investing in change.
Thank you very much, Dr. Riddle, for that great presentation. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to open it up for some discussion in the town hall, and I'd like to start off with Nick. Nick, as an angel investor, what do you think about these potential investment business models from the Ukrainian diaspora? You think something like this could work? And in your opinion, which one would be the most attractive?
So in my opinion, most people are actually motivated by a combination of social recognition and wanting to help their country, but also wanting to make money from that. So the model that makes most sense to me is the one that's not just a pure charity, not the loans model, but the investment fund. And it tends to be reflected in the survey results as well, because that's the one that most people said they will put in most money in 3 years in. Of course, everybody is very, very skeptical in the diaspora. We were born and grew up in the Soviet Union, in general, about business, investments, or charity. So wait and see approach definitely is prevailing among the people I know. But that said, Ukrainians are proud people. They want to help other Ukrainians, both here in the States and in Canada, as well as back home. We certainly have seen that in our charity organization and in our diaspora in California. So I think if there is the right balance being struck between the helping and the charity part of it, but also an opportunity to make money from it, from supporting Ukraine, that would be the best model.
Okay. Yevhen, my question to you is, there we go. You work with a lot of startups, some of which you help to fund in a seed capital stage. Others you're aware of in terms of those who have bootstrapped themselves. What do you think would be their reaction to a discussion of these models? Would they want to participate in something like this, or would they be somewhat reluctant?
Sure. Just a quick note before that. I'm global Ukrainian who was born in Ukraine, but spent half of my life outside and returned back in 2012, actually to start for-profit activities in tech. So the first remark, actually, I do agree with Ukrainian diaspora that the ICT is the most attractive sector. I personally bet, part of my net worth and also other people's money, and we've been doing for the last 5 years quite successfully. So I think that, first, for me, the model that would be not just would attract most of capital, but the one that will be most sustainable is for-profit investments, and that does give a huge social impact here in the country. So though most of our business are globally focused, we do create most of jobs in Ukraine while still, making money and making profits. So, and most of actually Ukrainian businesses, whether bootstrap or raise seed funding from us or, 5-6 other funds in Ukraine who pursue same model, are those who focus on US market. So I think that Ukraine diaspora, especially those who, have business experience and networks to invest, could bring value added to many of Ukrainian tech startups because they do enter and focus on US market. So I'm very big fan of that for-profit social impact model.
Okay, and you think Ukrainian entrepreneurs would be willing to work with this?
Absolutely.
Okay. Natalia, I have a question for you. Where do we go from here with these models? Has there been any discussion at USAID about implementing any of these models?
Well, actually, USAID launched our new Ukraine Financial Sector Transformation Project. And as one of the objectives in developing the non-bank financial sector, we put for the new implementer, that's DI Global, to also research and look at the diaspora potential and see what we can do about it. Just recently, in August of this year, Ukraine, Kyiv hosted a huge diaspora forum when we had over 100 delegates from around the world with some 200 forum participants. And the idea was, again, what we can do together, how can diaspora assist Ukraine in attracting foreign direct investment. And again, without the particular mechanism or the central fund, we already see some models tested. For example, we have a program USAID, it's economic opportunities of people affected by conflict. It's when there are people who are internally displaced people, they are put into the business training program, and they have an opportunity to win a grant. And that grant is then facilitated by a mentor for 6 months, when they can actually help them go through that process. Another mechanism is the social impact investment, which is done through our partner, Western Enterprise Fund. It's a very new development for Ukraine, and again, Western Enterprise, they pioneered the social impact investment. They choose 2 partner banks. So far, they gave 9 loans worth of 321,000. And again, those people who receive these loans, they are very happy recipients, and still they say that it takes them so long to process application with the bank. So we see there is a need, and there is like a met demand. The banking sector does not provide financing. Social impact investment is also not available to all, because still the bank has to do all the due diligence. And the grant program, again, it's limited opportunities for grant receiving. So definitely we are looking into building a model, like looking again, maybe if it needs to be further developed. We also see that it's not just about establishing the fund. You have to market it properly. You have to connect people and stories, beneficiaries with potential investors. And on the other side, again, this Western Enterprise Fund, just recently they announced their new ventures fund. It's a special fund when you can tap into, it's for IT and startup companies, and they already financed investment worth of 2.3 million, with the 5 million total available for these initiatives. So again, on the backslash of non-existing central fund, there are different models that we try and see how they work. This gives us opportunities to test the ground, see what are the barriers here in particular, and what can we do together to mitigate that.
Thanks, Natalia, for sharing that with us. Dr. Riddle, I'm curious about your experience with other diasporas around the world. Do you have any examples of a diaspora that's been very successful with investment in its home country?
Well, there are many different examples. I think one of the most famous examples that people do speak of course, is the Indian diaspora. I think that's a very interesting diaspora community, because the diaspora engages multi-generationally and does not only invest in terms of financial capital, investing in businesses back home, but also through incredible knowledge transfer between the sort of transnational ties that exist in particularly in the ICT high-tech sector with the Indian diaspora community. Of course, the Indian government also has created an entire holiday around reminding and welcoming and reinforcing those ties of non-resident Indians and their Indian diaspora abroad back home with India. So I think that's perhaps one of the more famous examples. But there are others as well. I think the Ethiopian diaspora is also one that is quite fascinating. We have all kinds of examples of Ethiopians from the United States and elsewhere that have gone back to that country and brought significant innovations in the economy and society there. The Ethiopian Commodities Exchange, for example, is really the result of a dissertation of an Ethiopian diasporan who then went on to work at the World Bank and then brought that model to life in Ethiopia. And that model is now, that commodities exchange model is being replicated in several different African countries. So there are lots of examples, I think, of diaspora communities through those transnational social ties, and the use of diaspora organizations play a very critical role in mobilizing diaspora, getting the word out to diaspora about potential investments, but also creating that sort of social motivation that Nick was speaking about before, right? If you're a member of a diaspora organization and the idea of investing in your country of origin is spoken about and held in sort of high esteem, and people who do that receive recognition for those efforts, it tends to spread the word and galvanize interest, because people then learn not only about the opportunities for investment and can make smarter and wiser investments in their country of origin, but they can also see and more readily the impact that those investments make on the ground.
Thank you. Thank you. Nick, I have a question for you. I know that you spend a lot of time not only in the tech world, but also in the nonprofit world. You formed an organization called Nova Ukraine, I believe. and that's used to help humanitarian efforts in Ukraine. In your experience, is there much of a linkage between the older generations of Ukrainians in the U.S. and the newer generations that you represent?
Yes, absolutely. We see different generations of diaspora kind of congregating around different events in different spots, but they overlap significantly. There are certain challenges sometimes of bringing them together and aligning them. There is some amount of distrust between previous generations that came here and the first generation immigrants, but it really depends on the case by case basis. We've seen some events and some people that came for concerts, for speeches here from Ukraine that was universally well received by all generations, and we see some of those examples. But we also see some kind of internal politics and competition between these groups, trying to see like we love Ukraine more, and we're the only true Ukrainians. We're missions, right?
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Yevhen, I have a question for you. So, in terms of the trying to make this report real and trying to implement some of this, what do you think is the number one challenge at this point?
Well, let me first make another remark that so far Ukrainian diaspora, pretty much disinvolved from investing in the tech sector at all. I mean, we do screen the whole market and we have little to none activity so far, except for actual support of education initiatives related to to tech sector. So the Ukrainian diaspora already active in supporting the tech education, but not the tech companies themselves. To put it practically, I think any Ukrainian diaspora who would be interested to learn more actually would need to come either to Silicon Valley, where there's a lot of Ukrainian companies, and Nick can introduce to many of them, or come to Kiev, Lviv, Odessa, Kharkiv, where we have majority of technology companies, all sorts of businesses, and just find out more, combine businesses leisure as outlined in the report, because this is tech, in business and investments. Actually, this is business typically done with people, through people, and they need to learn and more. And there are established networks in Ukraine in terms of Ukrainian Venture Capital Association, U Angels Club, which combines angels investing in tech. There are few from diaspora, but majority people from Ukraine who are based and live there. And that would be a very practical step. So I think that the report outlines 3 models, but could be 4th model, which is actual direct investment, but it would require some efforts, into that by establishing your own network within the Ukrainian tech community, and just having a little bit more fun, alone making money and making impact.
Sounds good. Well, on that note, I think we're going to wrap it up for today because we're out of time. And I want to thank all of my guests today: Natalia Berezhna from USAID, Dr. Lisa Riddle from Washington University School of Business, George Washington University School of Business, excuse me, Nick Bilogorsky from 408 Ventures, and Yevhen Sisoyev from A Ventures. I think it's been an interesting presentation and discussion of this 2016 USAID study on Ukrainian diaspora investment. Mm-hmm. And again, thank you to our sponsors, USAID and US Ukraine Foundation. And I hope we will have more discussions like this in the future. And I hope for those of you in the audience who are listening to this, particularly for those in the Ukrainian diaspora, I hope this will energize you to get involved and go out and find out more about Ukrainian technology companies and hopefully invest in them to help Ukraine for the future. Thanks again, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Bye.
Thank you.